Hi everyone, I'm going to be going over chapters 10 through 13 in our microbiology class. This video is focused on chapter 10 in particular, which is the one on host microbe interactions and pathogenesis. So let's move on to the first concept, which is dysbiosis. What is dysbiosis? Dysbiosis is a microbiota imbalance. So for this concept, you can think of a scale and how there are good microbes in our body and bad microbes in our body. When the bad microbes outweigh the good ones, we call that dysbiosis. If you don't remember what microbiota is, just as a refresher, microbiota, you could think of the microorganisms that live inside our body. So microbiota, microorganisms that live inside our body. They also live on the outside of our body, like on our skin. And, you know, they have a good party time in our gut and stuff. And we like it because they protect us from the bad bacteria. So we want them there. What happens when the good microorganisms get disrupted? Like, for example, if we take antibiotics, well, that's not good because now the bad bacteria have less competition, so the bad bacteria flourish. That's not a good thing. So once again, dysbiosis is basically, it's like a disruption of our microbiota. And that can help us remember the concept dysbiosis. If you're having trouble remembering the word, just remember dys, like the word in the word disrupted, dis, and bio from microbiota, dysbiosis. So hopefully that helps you remember. Just remember dis and bio from disrupted microbiota, and then you got dysbiosis. All right, next concept is tropism. So you might be wondering why I have this tropical paradise on your screen here. Well, tropism is basically how pathogens prefer certain tissues or certain hosts. And how I remember this concept is I think of tropical, like the trop or the trope in tropism. And so yeah, just as tropical plants prefer certain climates, pathogens also prefer, certain tissues or hosts. For example, certain pathogens prefer to live in your lungs just because they love oxygen, and other pathogens prefer to live in your gut because there's less oxygen there, just as an example. So that's tropism. Just think of tropical plants preferring certain climates, and hopefully that helps you remember. Okay, so the next concept is pathogenicity. It can be kind of confusing, but if you break it down, it's actually pretty simple. So pathogenicity, you drop off the ity and you get pathogenic. So pathogenicity is just asking, is the microorganism pathogenic? And what does pathogenic mean? Basically, it's just asking, is it a pathogen? Is the microorganism a pathogen? If the answer is yes, then yeah, then the microorganism is pathogenic. It has pathogenicity. Pretty simple once you break it down. Virulence, it's a little bit harder to wrap your head around, but hopefully this helps. So virulence is kind of similar to pathogenicity, but it's more so the degree of the disease. How deadly is the pathogen? If the pathogen is very deadly, then it has a higher virulence than a pathogen that, maybe just gives you a stomach ache. So how I remember virulence, I just take the viru part and I think of virus, like viru sounds like virus. And I just think viruses are deadly. Virulence is how deadly is it, and I remember the concept by viruses are deadly. I know not all viruses are deadly, but it's just how it helps me remember this concept. Viruses are deadly, and maybe you could think of like an Ebola virus and how Ebola is very deadly in humans. So hopefully that helps you remember virulence. Just think viruses are deadly. Okay, so next concept is endotoxins versus exotoxins. Well, simply they're both toxins. That's pretty simple. They're both made by bacteria, so that's kind of cool. How they differ though, endotoxins are lipids, exotoxins are proteins. Maybe you might think, oh, that's just memorization, I'm gonna have to memorize that. But really, once you understand what an endotoxin is, it's pretty simple of remembering that it's a lipid. The endotoxins are found in the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria, so it's not in the gram-positive bacteria. And how you remember that is just go back to when we were going over bacteria way back in the beginning of the semester. And remember those lipopolysaccharides, these like blue cacti things that live on the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria? Yeah, those are the endotoxins, or the LPS. And lipo, I mean, these things are made out of fat. Lipo means fat, so it's a lipid. Yeah, that basically it helps you. And you remember it's made by gram-negative bacteria because the LPS are not on the gram-positive. It's just on the gram-negative bacteria. So how do these endotoxins get released? Well, since these LPS are in the outer membrane, in the cell wall of the gram-negative bacteria, when you kill the gram-negative bacteria, the cell membrane breaks apart, and basically these lipopolysaccharides float around in your bloodstream, and they're toxic, so it's not good for us. So let's go over to exotoxins. Exotoxins are made in gram-negative or gram-positive bacteria, so you're going to have to just remember that exotoxins can be found in both. Do all gram-negative and all gram-positive bacteria make exotoxins? No. Only certain ones do. So just make sure you remember that. They're made by either of them, but not all of them make exotoxins, just certain ones. So I also wanted I wanted to point out that exotoxins are only released from actively growing bacteria. So this is going back to an earlier chapter again. It's how everything comes full circle. I kind of like that concepts we learned earlier in the class come back. So remember how bacteria grow. We got the lag phase, the log phase. Log meaning it's grows exponentially. So when we have exponential bacteria growth, that's when the bacteria are releasing the exotoxins. It's during this phase. So just remember that, the bacteria, as they grow, they're synthesizing these proteins and that's when they're releasing the exotoxins. And literally the bacteria shoots out the exotoxins from it sprays out the exotoxins. It's releasing it, and that's not good for us. All right. Next, to try to remember which one is vaccines, which ones can be neutralized. This I thought was kind of hard to remember, so hopefully this helps a little bit. Just to point out that endotoxins do not have vaccines. But exotoxins, some of them do. And how I remember that, I just think of what's a type of exotoxin? Well, one type of exotoxin is tetanus. Tetanus is a exotoxin released by a certain bacteria. And we do have a vaccine for tetanus. There is a tetanus vaccine that I'm sure a lot of you have taken. So to remember which one's endotoxin, exotoxin for vaccines, just remember tetanus is an exotoxin, and there is a tetanus vaccine for that, whereas endotoxins do not. And for neutralization, it's the same. Whatever has a vaccine can be neutralized, and endotoxins don't have vaccines, so they can't be neutralized. For the toxicity level, it's kind of the opposite. That's how I try to remember it. So even though exotoxins do have vaccines, so you might think, they're not as bad as endotoxins. However, exotoxins have a higher toxicity level, so even though they can be prevented by vaccine, if they do infect us, it is more toxic to us. So exotoxins have a higher toxicity level than endotoxins, which cannot be vaccinated, but they have less toxicity. For the LD50, I'm not sure how many of you guys remember this concept, but basically LD50 is how lethal the toxin is. So why would a low LD50 have a higher toxicity? It's because if it needs a less amount of these toxins in your body to be lethal. If it needs more of these toxins in your body to be lethal, then it has a high LD50, and it's kind of the opposite. If you need more of something, then it's less toxic. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. So if there's just a few of these bacteria in your body and that is lethal, then that's highly toxic because you don't need as many, so it's worse. As far as which ones cause fever, basically all endotoxins cause fever. So just think when these bacteria get destroyed and they release the LPS, the endotoxins, and those LPS are going through your body, just think how that causes you to have a fever. Whereas the exotoxins, they sometimes cause fever, and how I remember that is one type of exotoxin is scarlet fever, and I just remember that one type of exotoxin is scarlet fever, and that's kind of rare, so not all exotoxins cause fever, and scarlet fever is just one example. So yeah, hopefully this has helped you go over chapter 10. I try to go pretty fast, but you can just rewatch the video and hopefully it's ingrained in your memory. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.